My beloved child, your soulmate has been carrying words for months, and the reason they never said them may be far more emotional than you realize. They have started the message, deleted it, opened your conversation, stared at your name, and then closed the phone without sending anything. But now, something has changed. They are tired of pretending that everything is fine. They have something they desperately want you to hear, and if you stay until the end, you may understand why they waited so long to say it. Please listen, because this is not about a perfect confession or some impossible promise. It is about two people who have been separated by silence, timing, fear, and feelings that neither one knew how to handle. Maybe you have felt that distance yourself. Maybe there was a time when your soulmate seemed completely present, almost like they were finally ready to open their heart, and then suddenly they became quiet. Their replies became slower. Their conversations became shorter. You wondered if their feelings had changed. You wondered if you had misunderstood everything. You may even have blamed yourself. But what if the silence was not rejection? What if they were struggling to find the courage to tell you something they had been carrying for months? Don't skip this part, because the first thing they want you to understand is that their silence had a reason. Imagine them late at night, sitting alone with their phone in their hand. The room is quiet. Everyone else has gone to sleep. They open your conversation and begin typing. I need to tell you something. They stop. They erase it. They try again. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Delete. Again. Please listen before you judge me. Delete. They stare at your name for several seconds, wondering whether sending one message could change everything between you. Then they put the phone down. Not because they don't care. Because they care too much. And that is where this story becomes personal. Sometimes the hardest thing to say is not, I love you. Sometimes it is, I was afraid. Your soulmate may have been afraid of what would happen if they admitted how deeply the connection affected them. They may have worried that once they said the truth out loud, there would be no way to return to the comfortable distance they had created. Maybe they were afraid you would expect an answer they weren't ready to give. Maybe they feared disappointing you. Maybe they were carrying something from their past that made trust difficult. And maybe, most importantly, they didn't want to bring their unfinished pain into your life. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. Something happened during those months that made them realize silence was becoming more painful than honesty. Perhaps it was a simple moment. They saw something that reminded them of you. A song playing in a grocery store. A familiar street. A restaurant you once talked about visiting. A photograph appearing unexpectedly on their phone. Nothing dramatic. Just an ordinary moment that suddenly brought back everything they had been trying not to think about. They remembered your voice. They remembered a conversation you had. They remembered the way you looked at them when they were trying to hide how emotional they felt. And suddenly, the distance didn't feel safe anymore. It felt empty. They realized that avoiding the conversation had not made their feelings disappear. It had only made them harder to ignore. Stay with me, because there is another reason they may have waited. Your soulmate may have been waiting for the right moment, but the right moment never came. Every opportunity seemed complicated. There was always something happening. Work, family, distance, timing, responsibilities. Maybe one of you was going through a difficult season. Maybe there were misunderstandings that needed to settle first. Maybe your soulmate kept telling themselves, "I'll tell them when things calm down." Then another week passed. Then another month. And eventually, they realized something painful. Life does not always become quiet enough for the conversation you are afraid to have. Sometimes you have to create the moment yourself. That realization may be what finally pushed them toward you. They may have started asking themselves questions they couldn't escape. What if I never tell them? What if they move on? What if they think I never cared? What if they needed to hear this months ago? Those questions can become heavier than the truth itself. And now they may be standing at the edge of a conversation they have postponed again and again. But what exactly are they trying to tell you? That is where things get interesting. It may not be one sentence. It may be several truths connected together. The first could be an apology. Not necessarily for something terrible, but for the moments when their behavior confused you. They may realize that they gave you mixed signals. They came close and then pulled away. They opened up and then became guarded. They made you feel important and then disappeared into silence. From your side, that may have felt unfair. From their side, it may have been fear fighting against emotion. They may finally want to say, "I'm sorry you had to wonder where you stood with me." And maybe that sentence is long overdue. Think about how powerful that moment could be. Not because an apology magically fixes everything, but because being understood can bring relief. Maybe you've spent months wondering whether you imagined the connection. Maybe you wondered whether the conversations meant as much to them as they meant to you. Maybe you replayed small details in your mind because you were searching for answers. Now imagine hearing them finally say, "You didn't imagine it." Those words could hit harder than any dramatic confession. Because sometimes what hurts most is uncertainty. You can handle a difficult truth when you know what it is. What destroys your peace is not knowing. Your soulmate may finally understand that. And there is another thing they may want you to know. During those months of silence, they were not simply waiting for you. They were also trying to understand themselves. They may have asked whether they were emotionally ready for something real. They may have looked at their past relationships and recognized patterns they didn't want to repeat. They may have realized that pushing people away had become their way of protecting themselves. When someone has been disappointed before, vulnerability can feel risky. Even when they genuinely care, they may instinctively create distance. Not because the person in front of them isn't important, but because getting close means there is something to lose. Your soulmate may have finally recognized that pattern in themselves. And once they recognized it, they couldn't pretend anymore. They had to decide whether they were going to keep protecting themselves or finally communicate honestly. That decision may have taken months. But now, they are closer to choosing honesty. Something huge is waiting for you in the next part of this story, but before we get there, notice one important detail. They haven't simply been thinking about what they want to say. They have been thinking about how you might react. That means they may have imagined several versions of this conversation. In one version, you forgive them immediately. In another, you become angry. In another, you ask why they waited so long. In another, you simply become silent. And that last possibility may scare them the most. Because deep down, they may be afraid that by the time they finally speak, you won't care anymore. They may worry that their chance has already passed. Maybe that is why they have been so hesitant. They don't just fear rejection. They fear arriving too late. Imagine receiving a message from them after months of uncertainty. You see their name appear on your screen. The message says, "Please don't respond until you've read the whole thing." Your heart starts beating faster. You open it. The first line says, "I've been waiting months to tell you this." You keep reading. They explain that they have rewritten the message countless times. They explain that there were nights when they wanted to call you but couldn't find the courage. They admit that some of their distance was intentional because they didn't know how to handle what they were feeling. Then comes a sentence that makes you stop. "The truth is, I was scared of how much your opinion mattered to me." That is not the kind of sentence someone writes casually. It reveals something deeper. Your soulmate may have realized that you became important to them in a way they never planned. They may have started measuring their choices against what you would think. They may have caught themselves wanting to share ordinary things with you. A funny moment. A stressful day. A small achievement. A random thought. That's often how emotional attachment becomes real. Not through one huge moment, but through hundreds of tiny moments when someone becomes the person you instinctively want to tell. And maybe your soulmate noticed that happening. Maybe it frightened them. Because once someone becomes part of your everyday thoughts, distance becomes much harder. But there is still one part of their message they haven't written. The part they keep deleting. The part that begins with, "There is something else you deserve to know." That sentence has been sitting in their drafts for weeks. They know that once they say it, the conversation will become more serious. It may explain why they disappeared at a particular moment. It may explain something you misunderstood. It may even reveal that another person or situation influenced their decision to step back. And that is why they have been so careful. They don't want you to hear half the story and judge the whole situation. They want you to understand what was happening behind the scenes. Maybe there was pressure from family. Maybe there was an old relationship that had not been emotionally resolved. Maybe there were responsibilities they didn't know how to balance. Maybe they were dealing with a major personal decision and didn't want to make promises while they were uncertain about their own life. None of that automatically excuses poor communication. But it may explain it. And your soulmate may finally be ready to take responsibility for that. They may say, "I should have trusted you enough to tell you what was happening." That sentence could be the real apology. Because love without communication can become a maze. One person waits. The other assumes. Both become hurt. Both stay silent. And eventually, both start believing a story that may not be true. Your soulmate may now want to break that cycle. But there is another twist. While preparing to talk to you, they may have discovered something about you that changed their perspective. Maybe someone told them something about your own feelings. Maybe they found an old message they had saved. Maybe they remembered a conversation where you quietly told them that you didn't want to be someone they had to chase. Those words may have stayed with them. They may have realized that your patience had limits. You were not going to wait forever for someone who couldn't communicate. And that realization may have created urgency. They don't want to make a dramatic promise. They want to finally be honest. They want you to know what happened, what they regret, and what they hope can happen next. But before they send that message, there is one final thing holding them back. They have one question for you. They don't know whether your heart is still open. They don't know whether the months of silence changed how you feel. And they are terrified of asking. So they decide to do something different. Instead of sending the entire message, they send only one line: "Are you still willing to hear me?" You see the notification. You stare at it. You know that whatever you answer could open a door that has been closed for months. You could say yes. You could ask what they want. You could ignore it. And your soulmate is sitting on the other side of that silence, waiting. Not knowing whether you will give them the chance they have been preparing for. If this story speaks to something you've experienced, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and comment what you would do if someone from your past suddenly said, "I have been waiting months to tell you this." Your answer might be exactly the kind of conversation this story is building toward. Because the next moment is where everything changes. You finally respond. Just 3 words, "Tell me everything." Your soulmate sees the message. They stop breathing for a second. Then they begin typing. This time, they don't delete anything. They don't hesitate. They don't rewrite the sentences. They finally say the words they have been holding back for months. But the first sentence is not what you expected. It says, "I didn't pull away because I stopped caring about you. I pulled away because someone told me something about you, and I believed them." And then comes the name of the person who changed everything. The name appears on your screen, and for a few seconds, you simply stare at it. Suddenly, all those months of confusion feel different. The unanswered questions. The sudden distance. The conversations that ended without explanation. The moments when your soulmate seemed ready to come closer and then disappeared again. You finally understand that there was another person involved in the story. But you don't know what they said. And more importantly, you don't know why your soulmate believed them. Your fingers hover over the screen. You could ask immediately, but something tells you to let them finish. Then another message arrives. "I should have told you this months ago." You keep reading. "Someone told me that you had already moved on. They said you were only talking to me because you felt sorry for me." You feel your heart sink. It explains the distance, but it doesn't explain everything. Because you know that wasn't the truth. You wonder who could have said something like that. Someone close enough to your soulmate to be believed. Someone who knew enough about both of you to make the story sound convincing. And that is when your soulmate sends another message. "I believe them because I was already afraid you didn't feel the same way." That sentence changes the entire emotional weight of the situation. Maybe they weren't looking for a reason to leave. Maybe they were looking for proof that leaving would hurt less. Sometimes fear doesn't need a huge lie. It only needs one small doubt. One sentence at the right moment. One suggestion planted in someone's mind when they're already uncertain. And your soulmate may have been carrying that doubt for months. They tell you there was a night when they almost called. They had your number open. They had already decided they were going to ask you directly whether the rumors were true. But then they stopped. They thought, if they wanted me, wouldn't they have reached out first? So they waited. You waited too. And 2 people who cared about each other ended up creating distance because neither wanted to be the first one to risk getting hurt. But your soulmate isn't finished. "There is something I haven't told you," they write. "The person who told me those things wasn't a stranger. Your heart immediately changes. Who was it? A friend? A family member? Someone from your soulmate's past? Someone who had their own reasons for interfering? You ask, who? There is a long pause. You see the typing indicator appear. Then disappear. Appear again. Finally, the answer arrives. It is someone you never expected. Not necessarily someone you considered an enemy. Someone who may have smiled at you before. Someone who may have acted supportive. And suddenly, old conversations begin to look different. Your soulmate explains that this person had been around during one of the most confusing periods of their life. They listened when you soulmate talked about you. They heard the stories. They knew how much your soulmate cared. But instead of encouraging honesty, they offered their own interpretation. They're not serious about you. They're probably talking to someone else. Don't embarrass yourself. Give them space. At the time, your soulmate thought those comments were harmless. But slowly, they became beliefs. And once those beliefs settled in, your soulmate started looking at every little thing through them. If you replied late, it became proof. If you were busy, it became proof. If you didn't ask about them one day, it became proof. Every ordinary event suddenly seemed to confirm the story they had already been told. This is how misunderstandings grow. Not because one person knows the whole truth, but because fear fills in the missing pieces. Your soulmate admits that they regret it. I should have asked you. That's the sentence they keep repeating. I should have come to you instead of listening to someone else. And maybe that is the real reason they have been waiting months to talk. They aren't simply confessing feelings. They're taking responsibility. They're admitting that they let someone else's opinion become louder than their own experience with you. But then they reveal something that makes the situation even more complicated. The person who influenced them wasn't simply trying to separate you. They had a reason. And when your soulmate discovered that reason, they felt betrayed themselves. Apparently, this person had been carrying their own misunderstanding. They believed that protecting your soulmate meant keeping them away from you. Maybe they had seen your soulmate hurt before. Maybe they thought they were preventing another heartbreak. Maybe they had watched relationships fall apart and became convinced that distance was safer than vulnerability. Their intentions may not have been completely cruel, but their actions still caused damage. And your soulmate finally realized something important. Good intentions don't erase the consequences of bad decisions. That realization may have been the moment they decided they needed to speak to you. They couldn't change the months that had already passed. But they could stop allowing someone else's version of the story to control what happened next. Then your soulmate tells you about the moment they knew they had to reach out. It happened Unexpectedly. They were going through an ordinary day when they found something they had forgotten they kept. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it was a message from you. Maybe it was a small object connected to a memory you both shared. They held it in their hands and suddenly remembered something very clearly. The last time they had seen you, you had looked at them and said something simple. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. Your soulmate realized that months had passed, and you had never broken that promise. They had been the one who disappeared. They had been the one who assumed. They had been the one who allowed fear to make decisions for them. And suddenly, they couldn't live comfortably with that anymore. So they began writing the message. They wrote everything. Then deleted everything. Then started again. This time, they decided they would tell you the truth without trying to control your response. They would not demand forgiveness. They would not expect you to forget the hurt. They would simply tell you what happened and allow you to decide what it meant. That is why their message feels different now. There is no pressure in it. There is vulnerability. I know I hurt you, they write. I know I made you question yourself. I know my silence made you feel like you weren't important. But you were never the problem. You read that sentence again. You were never the problem. Maybe those are words you needed to hear more than you realized. Because when someone pulls away without explaining why, the person left behind often starts searching for something wrong with themselves. Did I say too much? Did I care too much? Did I make things uncomfortable? Was I not enough? But your soulmate is finally telling you that the distance was about their fear, their confusion, and the influence of someone else's words. Not your worth. Then comes the part they have been afraid to say for months. I missed you. Simple. Honest. No dramatic speech. Just 3 words. But they continue. I missed talking to you. I missed telling you stupid little things. I missed hearing what you thought about my day. I missed knowing what was happening in your life. And I hated pretending I didn't. You stop reading for a moment. Because now the story is no longer about a misunderstanding. It is about the quiet ways people realize someone has become important to them. Your soulmate tells you that they tried to move forward. They tried to distract themselves. They tried to convince themselves that the distance was necessary. But every time something good happened, they wanted to tell you. Every time something difficult happened, they wondered what you would say. And eventually, they understood that moving forward didn't mean pretending they never cared. It meant being honest about why they cared in the first place. But then comes the sentence that makes you sit up. There is one more reason I waited. You read it twice. Another pause. Then the message arrives. I was waiting to see if you would reach out because I needed to know whether I mattered to you too. That confession hurts in a completely different way. Because now you realize both of you may have been waiting for the other person to prove something. You thought their silence meant they didn't care. They thought your silence meant you didn't care. Neither of you knew that the other was quietly waiting. And the months disappeared between you. This is why communication matters. Sometimes people aren't separated by distance. They're separated by assumptions. Your soulmate admits they wish they had asked you directly. They wish they had trusted the conversations you actually had instead of the stories someone else created. They wish they had been brave enough to say, "I'm scared. Please tell me what you're feeling." But regret has a strange way of teaching people what courage should have looked like. Now they can't change the past. They can only decide what to do with the truth. And they want to know what you want. They aren't asking you to forget everything. They're asking for a chance to have one honest conversation without anyone else involved. No friends interpreting. No family opinions. No rumors. No guessing. Just you and them. They say, "If you still want to talk to me, I'll listen. And if you don't, I'll respect that too." You can feel the difference in those words. They aren't trying to control the outcome. They are finally giving you the choice they should have given you months ago. And perhaps that is the most important part of their message. They are not asking you to save them. They are not asking you to erase the past. They are asking to be heard. Then your phone rings. Not a message this time. A call. Their name appears on the screen. You stare at it for several seconds. You can feel everything you've been holding inside rising at once. The questions. The anger. The sadness. The memories. The hope you tried to bury. You answer. For the first few seconds, neither of you speaks. You can hear their breathing on the other side. Then they say your name quietly. Their voice sounds different. Softer. Almost nervous. I don't know where to start. You say, "Start with the truth." There is a long silence. Then they say something you never expected. The person who told me those things about you wasn't the only person who knew what was happening. You freeze. What do you mean? They take a breath. There was another conversation. And I heard something about you that made me realize I had misunderstood everything. You ask what they heard. They hesitate. I heard that you were waiting for me too. Your heart starts racing. Who told you that? Another silence. Then your soulmate says, "Someone who had been watching both of us from a distance." You don't know what that means. They explain that months earlier, someone had seen you asking about your soulmate. Someone had heard you say that you still cared. Someone had realized that the story your soulmate had been told was wrong. But instead of correcting it immediately, they waited. And now your soulmate has discovered why. There was a reason this person stayed silent. A reason that connects to an old decision your soulmate made long before they met you. And this is where the conversation takes a turn. Your soulmate says, "I found something yesterday." You ask what it was. They say, "A letter." Your stomach tightens. "A letter from who?" They answer, "From someone in my family." Then they add, "And it explains why I was so afraid to let you into my life." You can hear the emotion in their voice now. They are no longer hiding it. "I read that letter last night," they say. "And after I finished it, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore." You ask them what the letter said. They pause. Then they whisper, "It said that one day, I would meet someone who would force me to choose between the life everyone expected me to live and the life I actually wanted." You don't know what to say. Your soulmate continues, "And I think that person was talking about you." But then they say the one thing that makes the entire conversation stop. There's just one problem. You ask, "What problem?" Their voice becomes quiet. "The letter was written before I ever met you." And before you can respond, they add, "And your name was already written inside it."